Good evening and welcome to another episode of Rich Politics. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. I really appreciate it. Before I introduce my guest tonight, let me remind you to hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, do it now. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Well, my guest tonight is someone I admire and respect very much. She's the former Brexit Party MEP. She is the director of Academy of Ideas, and she recently was elevated to the House of Lords. It is, of course, the one and only Baroness Claire Fox of Buckley. Well, Claire, welcome, and thanks so much for agreeing to come on Rich Politics. And I've been a great fan of yours. I respect you highly and a lot of admiration for you. I know you don't, receive compliments very well. You brush them off, but you are a very special person to me. You've been an inspiration to me. You've supported me, and for that, I'll always be grateful. But tell us a little bit about the Claire Fox, the teenager Claire Fox, not the current Claire Fox, as we know, or Baroness, I should say. Your upbringing, a little bit of your teenage years, Claire. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I never quite know where to start, but I was, to the surprise of myself and my parents, I did quite well at school, and that was unusual. I went to a comprehensive in Flint, St. Richard Gwyn High School, and I suppose I loved learning, but it was quite a tough school, so you had to develop a kind of way of not just being the SWAT. So I was also considered to be something of a hard nut as well. So I kind of established my credentials early on as being able to do quite well at my O levels as it was then and stay on into the sixth form, but not completely alienate all the people who are going to leave school. So that was quite an important survival mechanism. And my family were, Irish immigrants as well, documented, but neither of them had anything of a formal education. But my dad in particular, who'd left school at 14, was very clever, very intellectually curious. And my mum was a typical Irish Catholic, but, the organizer in the local community at the church, helping everyone, liked to be at the center of things, and they were great entertainers. So I say all of those things because I had a really nice, it wasn't straightforward an upbringing. It was quite an argumentative family, and we obviously went through the usual problems that people went through. We didn't have a lot of money or anything, but I have to say that when I look back on it, and of course you never appreciate these things, they kind of gave me a real taste of a lively intellectual atmosphere, and they'd laugh if they could hear me saying that, but that's really what it was. We talked politics all the time. I argued all the time. I was a rebel, all that.
Well, I suppose, the passion your mum had for community and your dad for academia has rubbed off. Those two areas in particular have clearly rubbed off on you. And of course, they'd be proud of what you've achieved. I certainly am, because I know you as a friend, which means a lot. And I think, the girl from, those teenage years, Claire Fox, if you could see yourself back then as you are now, would you ever believe that you would end up in the House of Lords?
Absolutely not. I mean, apart from anything else, I want to abolish the House of Lords. So it is an odd thing. I've spent a lot of years ranting about, how dare those, House of Lords try and thwart Brexit or, act as though they've got any authority. So it's even more ironic. But no, of course, I certainly didn't. The greatest aspiration I had, I think, was, to be a teacher. I did. We're right to say that I wanted to get away from the area. I wanted to see the world. And by that, I don't mean go travelling. I more meant just leave Buckley. But I had a sort of sense of, trying to broaden my horizons. No, I'd never have thought. And of course, and then I was involved in, radical left politics for many years. So of course, the last place I imagined myself being was the House of Lords. But one thing you can say is that I've always been a bit of an outsider. So it never dawned on me that I would be given any kind of inroad to something that's so obviously the backbone of the establishment.
Well, I know a little bit about being an outsider. I've been that all my life. So join the club, as they say, as many of us. And I think it's the outsiders that really make a difference, really. But Claire, tell us, when did you find out you were nominated? And when you did, what did it feel like?
Yeah, so I found out in January. or rather, I was approached in January, and I have to say that, you know, I was absolutely gobsmacked. I mean, I just genuinely, I thought, you know, I couldn't believe it. But it also has to be said that when I was approached, it was said to me, we know you want to abolish the House of Lords. We don't care. You're not being nominated as a Tory. Your own person is a recognition of you, because they were basically saying, before you answer us, you're to listen. And so the kind of, you know, don't say anything, listen to our motivation. And the motivation was an acknowledgement of the role of the Brexit Party in the European elections, and that was acknowledged. And also the work of the Academy of Ideas and our contribution to creating an atmosphere of public debate and free speech. So they were the two things. And what it felt like was, initially my reaction was, oh, don't be ridiculous. It's very nice to be asked, but of course I'm not going to say yes. And I was given, you know, a week or so to think about it. And I basically didn't know what to do. I mean, I just thought, is it total hypocrisy? What will I do? But it's also the case that if you are an outsider, and also I'm oldish now, I realize, you know, but you get to a point where you think, oh my God, this is an opportunity, you know, to have a platform. And so it was that thing which I kept thinking, there's still a lot of things I believe are wrong and I want to change and I want to say, and maybe this is an opportunity to use a platform, even if it's one that I do think is an affront to democracy. Does this give me an opportunity to make an issue about things in a different arena? And so eventually I decided to take it, but it was a bit of a kind of, am I doing the right thing? And of course I still don't know, do I? It was a risk.
Well, you say that. Obviously, clearly you were gobsmacked. It was a shock for you, and you had a short space of time to decide. But you know, there was a lot of support for you. I know from the Brexiteers, from many people that follow you. Of course, you're going to get criticism. You get criticism. If you're not being criticised, you're not doing anything. That's the reality. And I always say, no statue has ever been erected to a critic. So I tend to live by that. But it must have been a bit of a culture shock for you, Claire. You know, going from, you know, how should we say, the normality of life. That's prior to lockdown, that is, and then being elevated to the House of Lords. What was it like for you walking through those corridors, you know, your maiden speech, which we'll come to in a few moments? It must have been a real shock to see, you know, people wearing all their gowns and all that kind of stuff. You know, in church, you know, it's the House of Lords. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was so weird. It's so weird. So first of all, it's really beautiful inside. So it's like being in a, you know, kind of museum, you know, and I keep wanting to stop and look at paintings, you know, everyone else, I'm like, oh, isn't that a lovely room? The library's got beautiful, you know, it's like the kind of old library that you imagine. And although I've only been to the House of Lords maybe 3 or 4 times to meet other peers, and I've gone, actually, I've been taken out to the terrace to where the smokers go, and I have had tea in the tea room once, but I mean, I hadn't really got a full sense of it, but it was always very intimidating when I'd visited, you know, just going through the doors. Of course, what's really weird is people calling you milady. I know, can you imagine? So you kind of like the staff will, you know, I'm going in and they'll say, good morning, Lady Fox, or good morning, Baroness Fox. And I honestly, you know, I'm looking over my shoulder. So it's very peculiar. And you don't want to be churlish about it. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's the kind of thing where you want to say, you know, call me Claire. But actually, that's not the way things are done. And to be honest, it would embarrass them to do that. You know, it's a bit too like the vicar at a disco, really. You know, it's too sort of like, oh, call me Claire. So it's like, no, get on with it, Claire. You've got to accept all this. But it is intimidating. There's no doubt about it. It's designed as a tribute to authority and power. And it's also the case that despite the reassurance that I was given by lots of people that in the House of Lords, there's less sectarianism in the House of Commons, and everyone will be very nice to me, and everyone will show you round and be kind and everything. It hasn't entirely been like that. I mean, that's not been... Now, the staff have been brilliant. I've also discovered that a huge number of staff at the House of Lords voted Leave, so they all knew who I was. They've been particularly on side, but not just the Leavers, but that's just been nice to discover that. But what I can't say that all of, my honourable friends have entirely welcomed me. Some of them have made it very clear that they consider me a retrograde that shouldn't be there. So that's a bit frightening. And, it's just scary. It's scary. You just don't know what, but I'm not a child. It's up to me to, overcome that. And I did have this very weird experience of being in the European Parliament, where it was equally intimidating in a different way and certainly not friendly. And so I have to make do with it.
Well, Claire, obviously you've had to learn a lot in a very short space of time by the sounds of it, and that can be quite daunting in itself. But as you know, you face criticism, as you've mentioned already, from certain people, regards to abolishing the House of Lords, which some of us campaigned on. It was part of our manifesto with the Brexit Party and such forth. I mean, how do you answer those critics? Now, I've read your response to those critics, and it was very thorough and very well thought out and very meaningful. But for the purpose of our viewers, how would you justify and overcome the fact that you are in the House of Lords now and you were very, very keen to have it abolished? How would you answer them?
Well, I still am. I don't think that the House of Lords should exist as an unelected chamber. It's straightforward. I don't. And of course, you could say, well, you're a hypocrite, therefore, to be in there. But it's not as though I've changed my mind. I think that if you start finding me saying, well, the good thing about the House of Lords is this, or I rather like the House of Lords, then you can have a go at me. But actually, I want to abolish the House of Lords. It's just that there's no point me going in the House of Lords and stand up every 5 minutes and say, I want to abolish the House of Lords, because they're not the people I need to convince. I mean, they're not going to be abolishing themselves.
No.
So, we all know that we need a major constitutional shake-up in the UK. Democracy is definitely insulted by the existence of an unelected second chamber that tries to alter the decisions made by a democratically elected group of MPs and in the Houses of Parliament. I don't think there's any way of squaring it. I am in there because I see it as a platform. Now, also I was ennobled at the same time as, a couple of Labour Party nominees, both of whom were Corbyn supporters, both of whom, as far as I can see, were opposed to the House of Lords. And one of them actually wrote an article saying, I've always thought that we should, reform that. And they didn't get any criticism. The Green Party, two baronesses from the Green Party also think that the House of Lords needs to be done away with as an unelected chamber, but they use it. So what I'm trying to say, and also the European Parliament, obviously I thought that should, don't think that's democratic either. So the danger is of me sounding defensive, whereas I just think I made that decision personally to use the House of Lords as a platform for what I believe in politically. And I see the irony and I accept the criticism. And people just have to see whether I use it for good or bad.
Thanks, Claire. Really appreciate that and your honesty as well. Well, we're going to play a clip now from your maiden speech. You remember it, 3 minutes and 12 seconds, I think it was. The longest 3 minutes of your life. I know you weren't happy with it, but we're just going to show it now to our viewers and then we'll come back and talk about it.
I call the next speaker Baroness Fox of Buckley.
My lords, it's a great pleasure to speak for the first time in your lordship's house. Can I thank all the wonderful staff here, especially actually the security guards who've taken me under their wing and ensured I found everywhere from the Salisbury room to the smoking outpost, and of course to the doorkeepers who've gone out of their way to find me a seat each day so that I could watch the chamber close up and learn. I'm particularly honoured that my two supporters are both renowned public intellectuals who I've admired for years. The noble Baroness Wolfe, whose invaluable educational research has ensured that those young people who do not go to university aren't forgotten, focusing on the importance of training in the further education sector, where I lectured for many years. Then noble Lord Glassman, who has long been an inspiration with his advocacy of communities and their values and never shying away from speaking truth to power. And thanks to you, my lords, for being gracious enough to accept me. Let's be frank, my appointment is not uncontentious.
So there you go. There's Baroness Fox of Buckley. You can take the girl out of Buckley, but you can't take Buckley out of the girl, as they say, Claire. That's right, isn't it? You know, a couple of things from your maiden speech there that stuck out to me. First one was, my appointment is not uncontentious. I mean, one of your opening remarks, you know, clearly you pointed out already, being an outsider and a rebel. But more importantly was your comment about how people need more control over laws, their lives and their liberties. Now, you've always been a champion for civil liberties, I know, and freedom of speech and thought. We'll come to that a bit later about the Academy of Ideas. But what did you mean by the people taking back control of laws, lives and liberties?
Well, I think one of the ironies for those of us who campaigned for leave, won the vote in 2016, and then had that major struggle to ensure that we could make Brexit mean that we were recognised as the rightful people who democracy belongs to, as in voters, that, you know, in the end, MPs are the servants of the voters, and that the Take Back Control slogan of the Leave campaign resonated for so many people who'd just been treated as though they were objects to be done to by those in power and the technocratic elites. And then we've had COVID. So my biggest problem was, you know, we felt like we'd kind of got somewhere. We'd reasserted, we'd thwarted the Remain alliance, okay, in a compromised way via Boris Johnson being the head of the Tory party and then winning that election. But nonetheless, it was yet again a statement of, yes, we want Brexit to happen. And Brexit means taking control of our laws and our liberties and our lives. And now we have COVID. And so I was doing my maiden speech very conscious of the fact that every day our lives and our liberties were being taken away because of lockdown and because of a pandemic. And I just wanted to say that's only temporary. You know, we haven't forgotten that we want to take back control.
Yeah,
we might have to sacrifice it temporarily, but that's it.
Well, yeah, coming back to that, because obviously with what's happening with lockdown now, I mean, you've gone into lockdown as of yesterday. We're coming out on Monday. It's crazy me even using this language, really. You know, you're going in and we're coming out. It's like you're going in remand and I've been released and I'm out on bail. It's just, and I am used to those terms, by the way, Claire. I am used to them, but it's interesting. I mean, one of the things, though, that you mentioned in your maiden speech as well, which really plays into the narrative of where we're at right now, is about the regulations on civil liberties, because that's what these lockdowns really, materialistically, this is what they are. They are regulations on our civil liberties. Now, I believe, and I've mentioned it on a few other broadcasts, that they're an attack on our civil liberties. Some would argue that it's a public health crisis, and so we have to take these measures. What did you mean by these are regulations on our civil liberties?
But that's exactly right. You see, it is a public health emergency. And if the government were prepared to say, any government, from Drakeford to Johnson, looked us in the eye and said, look, we know that we are going to temporarily take away your civil liberties. But believe me, freedom is front and center for us. We are absolutely, that is the key thing for us. So we're only doing it temporarily. But what they've done is they've said, we believe in freedom, but public health and safety is more important. So we're going to now attack your civil liberties to fight the pandemic. And then if you say, but can you just guarantee us that we can get those freedoms back? They say, you COVID-idiot, stop complaining, right? So in other words, they've started to make out that those people who believe in civil liberties and freedoms, who might temporarily give them up in order for the greater social good, even though I think it's an OTT response to this pandemic. But even if you accepted that, they have now stopped saying that freedom is the key foundational value in society. And it's almost like if you raise it, you're considered to be a maverick, an anti-masker, an anti-vaxxer, a conspiracy theorist. And I think that is very dangerous. So those civil liberties were really hard fought for over decades and centuries. And for them to come along and say, well, sorry, but there's a pandemic around the corner, so we've just got to tear everything up. And they haven't said to us, you know, it would be great, wouldn't it, if they said, as soon as this is over, we're going to tear up into shreds every single legislation or regulation we've made that attacks your liberties. Don't worry, we're going to tear them up and destroy them. It's only temporary. But they haven't said that. And I fear that they are making those illiberal assaults on our freedom the new normal.